Africa did not start this solar fire, but we are the one getting burned. So let me tell you what happened so you better understand what we're talking about here. You all know Ethiopia, right? It's a country that barely registered in global trade 18 months ago, but it became one of the world's fastest growing solar exporter pretty much overnight, right? And by May 2026, it was actually Ethiopia's fourth largest export commodity. $99 million in 5 months and a tenfold increase in 1 year. In fact, what I'm showing you here, it's as you could see, this is a graph from the FDI. So this is where I actually picked up this information first because I must admit they reached out to me and we had a conversation and I had a small contribution to the article that they released. But you could see here, so the photovoltaic cells is actually, as I'll say, the fourth largest export from Ethiopia, right? And that is actually was quite impressive because we didn't know, you and I didn't know Ethiopia as a big exporter of solar projects, right? That's actually what we would say. But yeah, it did happen. So let me obviously further explain the situation. So this, first of all, should have been a celebration. This should have been the Africa industrialization story we've been waiting for decades to tell. Instead, what do we get? We get the United States opening a trade probe. So what happened? You have 8 U.S. solar manufacturers. They filed a complaint with the Department of Commerce. And what they're saying, they're actually accusing Ethiopia of being used to circumvent the tariff on Chinese solar component. And just like that, so the Africa solar moment became the Africa solar problem. But here is what nobody would say out loud. And I want to say that clearly. So Africa didn't create this trade war. So Africa didn't dump solar panel in 2012. So Africa didn't trigger the solar one, two, three, or four. I'm referring to obviously all those tariff rules that was actually being pushed out by the successive American government. So Africa, we just showed up, and now we're being told that the rules that apply to everybody else don't apply to us the same way. So that's the story. And we need to talk about that a little bit more. That's why I say, hey, I want to look at that and tell you what I think. So stay with me because this is not just about Ethiopia. It's not just about solar panel. This is whether Africa is allowed to industrialize on its own time, right? Okay, guys. So let's have a word about it. Hey everybody, how are you doing? My name is Tony. I'm the founder and CEO of RIA. What we do, very simple. We raise awareness about renewable energy and sustainability. If you are interested to break or to expand into Africa, we are your eco bridge to this market and we can help you three things: the visibility, the leads, and the deals. You know it by now, right? Or if you're looking to decarbonize, we are again your eco bridge to sustainable pathway and we can help you with carbon footprint assessment and carbon reduction strategy. So reach out to us. We are more than happy to talk to you about that. Now, let me carry on and talk about what actually is happening here with this. It's a crazy story, and it's worth talking about that. In fact, I want to talk about what I call here the whack-a-mole pattern. So you have the US first imposing anti-dumping and countervailing duty. That was on Chinese solar product. That was back in December 2012. You may remember that. So we call that solar one. And what happened next once they put it out there? So you have Chinese manufacturer, they shifted the production to Cambodia, to Malaysia, to Thailand, and Vietnam. And after that, the US actually counter and no tariff followed in 2023. That was solar free. In between, obviously, they had some other rules that they pushed out, right? With solar free, so obviously, like say, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Thailand, Vietnam. But after that, China also pushed that to India, Indonesia, Laos. That was solar full. It was actually in 2025. And imports from those Southeast Asian countries, they collapsed from something like $12.2 billion in 2023 to 1.3 billion in 2025. Yeah. Now we're looking at Ethiopia, which seems to be the next country being kind of threatening here. And those are actually the solar fire we talked about here. I don't know if you see the pattern. The pattern is very simple, right? So every time a country becomes competitive in solar, the hammer comes down, right? So the goalposts just move. So they follow you. So that's actually what we're seeing here. So what's actually happening in Ethiopia? What is it doing? So what we have here, we have two companies at the center of all of this. We have Toyo Solar, which is a Japanese firm, and Origin Solar. They're owned by Singapore-based, Zito Holding, right? So they set up manufacturing in Ethiopia. So Toyo they built a 2 gigawatt solar cell plant in Hawassa, that was in Ethiopia. And Origin Solar, the opened a factory estimated at 4.2 gigawatt annual capacity, right? That's great. And the US manufacturer actually claim they are actually taking Chinese wafer, doing minimal processing in Ethiopia, and then shipping that to the US as Ethiopian origin products, then bypassing the tariff. That's what we're seeing here. So, and Toyo actually pushed back. In fact, the chief strategy officer, he told FGI intelligence. So you want to read that article, that is very interesting. And what he said, and I quote, so the accusations are not based on fact, right? He said that all the polysilicon are non-Chinese. It's sourced from the US and a Korean company in Malaysia. And all sales processing is happening in Ethiopia. I just want to show you, first of all, the second graph in here, why you could see those 8 solar companies in the US are concerned. You can clearly see that, obviously, for the last few months, so the direction for the solar export from Ethiopia is been moving to the US, right? You could see here the amount of units, and which we talked about close to 600 million units. So all the way, and look at the value corresponding there. So this is actually what is actually creating the frustration and the anger of this American company. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to show, to understand where is that complaint is coming from. But on my side, I don't know who is right, to be quite fair, right? So I can't actually make a judgment call on that. So that's for the Department of Commerce to determine. But here is what I know, and here is what I want to discuss with you because it matters, right? So let's look at the structural reality that nobody wants to admit. So yes, China control approximately 85% of global solar capacity, the supply chain, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So that's not a preference. That's actually a fact from the International Energy Agency, the IEA. So definitely go and check, do your research. You will see that, right? So, and like somebody at BNF said, you cannot build solar manufacturing capacity anywhere in the world right now without some dependency on China. It's impossible. Talk about the equipment, talk about the material, talk about the component. China dominate the entire stack. Like I've always said, in renewables energy, there's only one superpower, and this is China. You gotta admit that. So when we have US manufacturer accusing Ethiopia of using Chinese input, they're actually describing the reality which actually the entire solar industry is going through. This is not an Ethiopian anomaly, right? So the question is whether Chinese input were used. Yeah, so this is not the question we should be asking. The right question, in my humble view, is at what point does processing in Ethiopia, constitute a genuine manufacturing? Yeah, and who gets to define that line? That's actually the right question we want to be asking. Otherwise, we're actually making sort of the wrong judgment here. So right now, the U.S. manufacturer are the one drawing that line, but I don't think they should be the one drawing that line because I've told you what the industry is looking at right now, right? And yeah, I know they have a direct financial interest in where that line falls. Hence, I am not convinced that the way they feed the situation is the way thing actually is, and whether that's the way it should be, right? So now, what is at stake beyond Ethiopia? Because what I said here, So the situation that we're talking about here, we're describing, it's not just something for Ethiopia. And that's what I want to stress on. So it matters at continental scale. So in 2025, what we had was that a record, so 8 solar manufacturing projects worth about $1.5 billion, they were announced across Africa, and up from just 300 million the year before, right? So you can see that's progress. So that investment momentum is now watching this probe very carefully. Yes. Why am I saying that? Because if the Department of Commerce ruled against Ethiopia facility, the signal is clear. And what is that signal? It says that Africa cannot serve as a low-cost manufacturing base for solar, even when it's trying to do exactly what every development economist recommend. You know, attract FDI. That's what usually people used to tell us. Build export capacity, move up the value chain. Yeah, that's what people have been telling us. We're doing it. And the irony, that's precisely the industrialization model that the West has been telling Africa to follow for more than 30 years. That's what Ethiopia is actually aiming to do here. That's what I'm saying, that this problem is very important. So, looking at that, what do we actually do about it? What is the move? So, I'm not here to just explain the problem because we cannot clearly understand the problem. I'm here to tell you that Africa must do certain things differently, because complaining about the rules without changing our strategy is just noise. And I must admit as well, I've criticized our own self. We're very good at that, criticizing. Now, how do we move things? How do we do things differently? So let me just share my perspective here. And this is where, so maybe you may want to take some notes and maybe reach out to me. We can discuss about that because I think it's important. But let me just share my kind of strategy, put it that way. So first thing, I think we should stop building exclusively for the US market. Yes, because if you build for the US market on the US rule, you will always be subject to US trade policy. Yes, fact. And that policy will always prioritize US manufacturer first. No, right? So America first, right? So, and we can't really blame them. So Africa primary solar market, for me, guess who we should be? Africa, obviously, right? 600 million people without reliable electricity. A continent adding the equivalent of a new city every week in population. I'm talking about in population. So the demand is here, right? So build for that market first, yeah? Export the surplus, not the other way around. So that's the first thing that I think we should do differently. And I really, really want to stress on that. The second thing, I believe that we should push for genuine local value addition, not just assembly, because this is where I'll have to be honest as well with the Ethiopia story. So there is a difference between genuine manufacturing and tariff arbitrage. And Africa needs to be on the right side of that line. And I know what I'm talking about because I've been, like I said, attending the trade meeting, between or forum, seminar between Korea and Africa, right? So that's why I know what I'm talking about here. So Africa needs to be on the right side, not just legally, but also strategically. So real industrialization leaves fingerprints. So you want to have local engineer trained in cell production. You want to have local supplier entering the value chain, glass, frame, wiring, local content ratio above 50%. This is really how you develop your local value chain. And also, we just screwing. So, I mean, okay, what I'm saying, if all we do is just putting the last screw, the last bolt, right, and we call it made in Africa, this is not industrialization, guys. Let's be honest. Now, this is just a corridor, and corridor get closed, and that's actually what we about to see as well here with Ethiopia, right? So we shouldn't do that. We should push for genuine local value addition. Yeah, as I said, that was my second point. So the third point I want to say here, and that's what I want to connect with the trip that I made in Korea, right, and also dealing with the AfCFTA. So the African Continental Free Trade Area exists precisely to create intra-African trade rules, right, that Africa will control. So we cannot keep building industry that depend on rule written in Washington or Brussels or London or Paris or Frankfurt, whatever. So AfCFTA needs to develop specific solar and clean energy manufacturing standards. So local content framework, rules of origin, technology transfer requirement that protect African manufacturer from both Chinese dumping but also US trade pressure. That's what we should be doing. That's the game for me that we need to be playing. So regional trade rules, African standard and African market ownership. Very important. And that was my third point. Guess what? I do have a fourth point. Yes, exactly. And the fourth point that I want to share with you, hopefully you take note because I'd like to hear your perspective. I'd like you to challenge me on that. The first point is engage at the policy level now, not tomorrow, but now. So the Department of Commerce, they gave itself an extra 30 days beyond the initial 30-day deadline. So the process is still moving. So African government, the African Union, and the Continental Business Voice need to be part of that organization. Don't just leave Ethiopia on their own, yeah, watching from the sideline. No, don't do that. Silence in a trade dispute is not neutrality, it's surrender. Let's be honest and blunt. This is what's happening. Don't watch from the sideline. Engage. Be part of it. Yeah. So this is what I'll say. Those are the four things that I had to say. So this is what I'll say, that it's bigger than solar panel. So it's important because I wanted for you to understand that. But let me come back to where I started. So Ethiopia solar export surge from zero to a top 4 export commodity in 18 months. It's extraordinary. That's the kind of industrial momentum that doesn't happen by accident. It happened because a government created conditions, cheap renewable power, land, labor, and strategic positioning. That's a playbook Africa should be proud of and learning from. But the lesson of the solar trap isn't that Africa shouldn't try to industrialize in clean energy. The lesson is that we can't industrialize on other people's terms, for other people's market, under other people's rule. The clean energy transition is the biggest industrial opportunity of the 21st century. Africa has the sun. Africa has the mineral. Africa has the labor. Africa has the land. Where do you want me to stop, guys? Yeah. So we need now a strategy because it's not enough to have the resources. I'm tired of people say we have resources. Yes, go beyond that. Guess what? Country like South Korea didn't have resources, but they built a almost $2 trillion economy. No, you need a strategy. You need a standard and the collective will to say that we are not a corridor. We are not a workaround. We are not the latest stop in someone else's supply chain. We are a market. We are a manufacturer. We are a player. Africa didn't start this solar fire, but we have the right and every reason to be the one who shape what comes next. Would you agree with me? Yeah? If you agree with me, then the next bit is very important for you guys. So I want to say that if you found that useful, so I like you to share it with somebody building in Africa clean energy space. I wanted to drop your thought in the comment, and I want to know: do you think that the U.S. probe is legitimate? Trade enforcement or protectionism wearing a legal suit? So what would you say? Is it legitimate trade enforcement, protectionism? So what is that? And don't forget to subscribe. You want to hear more. So now the analysis behind Africa energy transition, it's what we do. So without sugarcoating it, yeah, I'm always giving you what I thought it's the reality from my point of view. Renewables in Africa, from my point of view. So I'm Tony from Renewables in Africa. So let's build, guy, and I want to hear from you. Okay, excellent. Hope you liked it. Take care, guys. Bye bye.